If you like the story, you can support the author on Patreon. Link is in the description.
Chapter 111, The Mysterious Person. November 1994. 12 Grimwald Palace. After Kriaker popped away, Harry turned around to face the doors of the house. Next moment, the door was pushed open and in walked a witch. She was tall, slim, and nice-looking. Her eyes were almost blue in color with blonde hair. Narcissa Malfoy née Black. Lady Malfoy, grinned Harry. It is a pleasure to see you. Narcissa maintained her calm face. Lord Black, pleasure is mine. Although, I had not expected for you to arrive so early, she said after a slight pause. Even before me. Harry chuckled. You could say, I was eager for the meeting. Narcissa nodded. It seems that you did not had any hardship in understanding the hint I gave in the letter. And it also seems that you had even guessed my identity, she added further. Harry laughed. A place which can only be accessed by 5 people. Not so tough to guess. Ancestral Black House, can be accessed by me, you, Mrs. Tonks, Sirius Black and finally Bellatrix Lestrange. He looked around at the depilate and the dirt condition of the house. It seems, we will have to do with this. Not a proper place to sit and talk. He sighed, as if almost amazed. I am not able to digest that the Black House does not have a cleaning ward. Narcissa replied, many of our ancestors believed that, these are works of the elves and things which provide them comfort should not exist. Quite intriguing views, said Harry, not reacting to how the Blacks might have treated their elves. Even if they were not abused, they were definitely overworked. Harry walked towards the main hall of the house while Narcissa followed behind him. But your elf does not seem to believe in these ideals of your family, commented Harry. Yes. Sighed Narcissa. He has almost gone insane after disappearance of Regulus, and now he only listens to one person, who is no less insane than him. Narcissa was not even finished when a loud screech cut her across. Who are you? Narcissa, what are you doing here? The voice followed. Harry stepped inside the hall to find a portrait hanging directly in front of the corridor which led to hall. Inside the portrait was an old witch. Walburga Black. Harry, not recognizing the witch, gazed at her intriguingly. Walburga also stared at Harry for a few seconds before she screamed, You are that Potter half-blood filth, that have taken over my house. And Narcissa, what are you doing with him here? That Black Lordship, belongs to your son. Harry narrowed his eyes in amusement, and who you might be. Walburga's eyes widened at Harry's audacity to not recognize her. She pointed her finger at him, You. She is my aunt, Walburga Black, replied Narcissa from behind. Serious mother, realization struck Harry. Walburga suddenly laughed hysterically, to think that useless son of mine was playing so deep. After all, he betrayed the Potters and showed ultimate loyalty to the Dark Lord. Harry could not help but chuckle, to think that you live in so much of your fantasies. Voldemort was vanquished, boomed Harry, and both the witches, one inside the painting and the other outside, flinched at the name. By me. All his followers killed, in Azkaban, or have to display hatred for him, if outside. What are you yapping about? And how much a fool did Voldemort made you all? Mocked Harry. He claimed to be descendant of Slytherin, yet I am Lord Slytherin. Walburga's face contorted into that of rage. Even Narcissa's face turned into a frown, as she had not been able to find a suitable explanation for it. She had been contemplating this issue since she discovered that Harry Potter was a Lord Slytherin. Dark Lord's entire campaign was built on him being a descendant of Slytherin. Well, no one dared to question his claim, but now that Harry had taken over Slytherin lordship, doubts would arise in everyone's heart. Walburga screamed, No, you, filthy half-blood, you must have used some dark magic, to trick yourself way into becoming a Lord Slytherin and Lord Black. Harry chuckled, Wasn't your Dark Lord a master of dark arts? Yet he was never able to trick his way, while I was successful. I sure am better than him. Walburga was to go on to another of hysterical rage, when Harry smirked, I have some additional news for you. One of your sons did betray his side, said Harry, his face having a mocking expression on his face. But it was not serious. It was Regulus Black. He betrayed Voldemort, just before his death. The hall remained in silence for moments before Walburga raged, You, filthy half-blood, you are lying. Regulus would never betray the Dark Lord. Narcissa standing behind also had an expression of disbelief written all over face. She would also never believe about Regulus betraying the Dark Lord. Harry shook his head and waved his hands, and the shouting of the Walburga instantly stopped. Even she realized that her voice was not able to reach outside and stopped screaming and stared at Harry with an angry face. "Normally, I don't waste time with fools like you," said Harry. "But one day, I will return back and show you the proof of Regulus' betrayal." Narcissa's eyes widened at this. She wondered if what Harry was telling was really the truth. "Only after that, I will burn your portrait," added Harry. Walburga, even though her voice was not coming outside, screamed hysterically while Harry paid no attention to her and walked towards the center of the hall. Narcissa followed behind. Chapter 113, Tale of Narcissa's Marriage. November 1994. 12 Grimwald Palace. Harry, followed by Narcissa, arrived near the center of the hall. Luxurious sofas surrounding a glass table was neatly arranged near the centered. A thick layer of dust had gathered on the sofa and table. Harry summoned his wand, and with a wave from it, a gust of wind blew away the gathered dust. Narcissa's eyes widened at this casual display of power. From an outsider perspective, it may seem a very simple use of magic, but the reality was different. Elemental spells were extremely rare and very hard to control. And with the ease, Harry performed the spell, without any chant and wand movement, spoke about his high control over element. Harry sat down on one of the sofas while Narcissa took her seat opposite him. Narcissa asked in a low whisper, "What you said about Regulus betraying the Dark Lord and Sirius being innocent is true?" Harry smiled amusedly. "If our deal goes well, I might add this information as an added benefit from my side." "Tell me, Mrs. Malfoy, what can I do for you?" asked Harry with curious gaze. Narcissa remained silent for some time, probably formulating her response. "First, let me tell you what I want, then I will offer you the price," said Narcissa. "I want you to use your status as Lord Black to nullify my marriage with Lucius." Narcissa went silent and looked for Harry's reaction, who had nothing more than a raised eyebrow on his face. "You don't seem surprised, Lord Black," she blurted out. "After I received your letter and guessed your identity, I had a hunch about what you would want," said Harry. "But the question is why? You and Lucius Malfoy appear to be an ideal couple. Pure-blood supremacist, muggle-hating, arrogant characters, everything matches quite well." Narcissa did not answer immediately. "While what you said about our characters are almost true, that does not mean that we will be an ideal couple. Since you are a Lord Black, I don't see a problem in taking you on a small history lesson," continued Narcissa. "The rise of the Dark Lord was an event which took everyone in the world by a storm. It was the time when he was not at the peak of his powers, he had just started to build forces. For this he approached all the pure-blood families using his claim as a descendant of Slytherin. As the Blacks were known blood supremacist, we were among the first families he approached. But my grandfather and Lord Black at that time, Arcturus Black, firmly rejected him. He was not as much as a blood supremacist as the other Blacks." She sighed. "The Dark felt insulted, but my grandfather was too strong, too influential for the Dark Lord to do anything against him. Along with his friendship with your grandfather, Charles Potter, the Dark Lord took no action. But illness took over my grandfather and he died when I had just graduated Hogwarts. Black Lordship passed to Sirius' father, Orion Black. He, along with my father, Pollux Black, my mother Drolia and Aunt Walburga, were hardcore blood supremacist." Her face remained neutral but her eyes turned sad. "The Dark Lord was slowing reaching the peak of his powers. My family was already planning to submit to him when a news startled the world. McKinnon family, a pure-blood family which had rejected to submit to the Dark Lord, was wiped. Every member of their family killed. Panic set in the Black family. Orion Black hastily submitted to the Dark Lord. Large amount of wealth was donated for his cause, but even so the Dark Lord had not forgotten his insult. Till now things were what he already knew from Voldemort's memories. But the last point of Voldemort, not forgetting his insult, was, though true, he never showed any grudge towards Orion. The Blacks were his biggest financial backer. Someone had played Orion and he could very well guess, who? Narcissa continued. Among the Dark Lord's followers, the Malfoy and the Lestrange family were his closest allies. Orion Black, in order to strengthen his position, decided to marry 3 of his nieces in these family. But even before the proposal could be placed, Andromeda ran away. Dark Lord's victory was a certainty and me and Bellatrix did not have courage like Andromeda. Even though Narcissa did not speak many things, how could he not understand? Lucius Malfoy and Rodolphus Lestrange were not qualified to marry princesses of the Black family. Before both the Malfoy and Lestrange elevated themselves to be the most noble family under Voldemort's reign of terror, they were far inferior in status to the Black family. It was clear that the Malfoy and the Lestrange had tricked Orion in believing that Voldemort was angry with the Black family. This explains your marriage story, but so many years later, why would you want a divorce? Asked Harry. Narcissa's face changed for first time. A slight tint of pain appeared on her face. Thought the marriage was forceful, I accepted my fate for my family. But for Lucius, I was nothing more than a showpiece, his cup of victory, his symbol of status, his way towards the Black inheritance. He is a complete whoremonger. Other than public places where he has to maintain an image, we have hardly talked. With the pathetic wizard he is, even I can kill him in my sleep, no sign of a competent man. She continued, her face resolute, even so, I had no problem in continuing this act. But things have changed recently, what he is going to do will put my life in danger. I have made enough compromises, but this time, I am not going to make one, said Narcissa. I want freedom from that man. Harry was curious, tell me, Mrs. Malfoy, how is Lucius Malfoy is going to put your life in danger? Chapter 114, Deal with Narcissa. November 1994. 12 Grimmauld Palace. Hearing Harry's question, Narcissa remained silent. She sighed, Lord Black, I hope you will hold your end of bargain. What I will tell is the information, I am trading for my freedom. As if trying to hype up and create a tense atmosphere, Narcissa turned extremely serious. Her eyes became focused and she looked as if checking her surroundings in caution, even though she was seated in Black manner. She finally leaned forward and whispered in a heavy voice, Lord Black, it would be hard to believe but the Dark Lord is alive. He is coming back. Narcissa had expected a lot of outcomes for her information reveal. A shocked and frightened Harry. An enraged Harry, losing control of his magic. But what happened was something she had never expected. Harry continued sitting calmly as if he not heard a mind-numbing information. Only amusement flickered in his eyes. You are not shocked? Asked Narcissa. You don't believe me? Harry chuckled, I know it from a long time, Mrs. Malfoy. Harry did not say anything more, but she understood one thing that he might be knowing even more than her. This time it was Narcissa who was shocked. You knew? She asked in daze. Harry simply nodded, your information is not very useful. Panic flashed across Narcissa's face but Harry's next words calmed her down. He said, but if you genuinely want to get away from Lucius' influence, I will nullify your marriage. I am more interested in your story, said Harry. He wants me to take the mark, and serve the Dark Lord directly, said Narcissa after some hesitation. Harry frowned, why? In previous war, you were free to not participate in the battles and were neither forced to take the mark. Harry from Voldemort's memories was aware that, neither Voldemort nor Lucius had any interest in Narcissa joining the war. But what would have happened so sudden? Previous war was different, the Malfoys were the right-hand man for the Dark Lord. They held a certain prestige and power, said Narcissa. Narcissa continued, things are different now. Lucius is in contact with the Dark Lord. I don't know the details, but the Dark Lord is currently in a weakened state. Harry nodded in understanding. Lucius being in contact with Voldemort was a new piece of information. She continued further, the Dark Lord was already dissatisfied with Lucius for his inaction over the last 14 years. He also was very angry, to the extreme that Lucius was tortured cruelly for some object he misplaced. The diary, Horcrux, thought Harry in his mind. And now that you have called the debts back, the financial clout Lucius had also been damaged. All the Death Eaters of Lucius' faction, Crabbe, Goyle, Knot have suddenly turned poor. Though Crabbe, Goyle, and Knot have suffered, they will be able to recover as their debts were smaller, but the Malfoys using their closeness with the Dark Lord had borrowed without any constraints from the Blacks and did not return a single dime in years. While we are talking, Lucius is busy in liquidating his assets so that he can return the money, said Narcissa. Now that his status have fallen so low, and I am no more of use in him gaining the Black inheritance, he wants to use me to elevate his status. He knows that I am an above-average wizard and also. She hesitated but added, also, he wants to prostitute myself to the other Death Eaters to earn their favor. Harry's eyes narrowed and he nodded solemnly, very well. I will nullify your marriage. But what after that? After the nullification Lucius will come against you with his full force, questioned Harry. Narcissa remained silent, I will try to leave the country. I have no other option, unless you offer me protection. Interesting, muttered Harry. You seem to have something in mind. Narcissa nodded. Hogwarts is the safest place and I have in potions in my newts and owls. I was a Slytherin and knows how the house functions. Harry understood her meaning. I have no problem. After all, I cannot be a greater enemy to Lucius than I am already. I am. It is your choice. Narcissa nodded while Harry questioned, what about Draco? Narcissa's face turned sad. Draco is just like his father. Other than the title of mother, I have no significance for him. Lucius has imbued all his ideas of blood purity and evilness in his mind. Though I will try to convince him to not to walk on his father's path, before it is too late, said Narcissa. I hope that if he decides to leave that path, you will give him a chance. Harry contemplated and nodded, very fine. I believe that soon he will also take the mark. If he decides to turn to M's side before that, I would be willing to give him a chance. If he takes the mark, he will have no mercy. Narcissa nodded. Although the chances were slim, she could only hope. He pulled his wand. I, Harry James Potter as Lord Black, hereby from this moment onwards nullify the wedding between Lucius Malfoy and Narcissa Black. All betrothal agreements are now declared void. A white light flashed around Narcissa and she felt Malfoy family's magic being severed from her soul, and the faint connection she had with the Black family magic, strengthened back to its full glory. She almost shuddered in delight on being free from that curse. I believe that you no longer have any place to stay, Miss Black, said Harry. Narcissa nodded. Creaker, called Harry, and the elf popped in. Harry could finally see the influence of the Slytherin's locket which had driven Creaker to insanity being reduced. The elf instantly looked at Narcissa. Lady, you be full black again. Narcissa smiled in response. Have you done as I told you? Asked Harry. Creaker nodded. I have placed it in a box. Keep it safe, said Harry. Though Narcissa did not understood what the two were talking, but she did not question. You can stay here, Miss Black, said Harry. Tonight, you will officially join Hogwarts. Creaker, added Harry. Start cleaning the house and make it livable. Instructing Creaker, Harry was just to apparate away when Narcissa interrupted. Lord Black. Chapter 115, James Potter's Will. November 1994. 12 Grimmauld Palace. Hearing Narcissa interrupt him, Harry turned around. About Regulus? And Sirius? Questioned Narcissa with hesitation in her voice. Harry smiled. What I said is true. Regulus betrayed Voldemort and Sirius never betrayed my parents. Narcissa trembled slightly. Sirius. It was always unbelievable to me that Sirius, who abandoned his family and then lived with Potters, would betray your father. Harry did not say anything in response. Narcissa controlled her emotions and gazed at Harry. Lord Black, said Narcissa. You truly are something else. At first, I thought, considering how your reaction to few things were portrayed, you would be too hard to deal with. She continued, but you are indeed generous. Without even getting any useful information, you readily helped me, even allowed me to join Hogwarts. She chuckled. Some would even call you naive. Her face turned serious. I have 2 more additional information. I don't know if it would be useful for you, but still. Harry's interest piqued at this. With him getting busy in his own problems, he had not been able to do anything about Voldemort. Although he had collected 2 Horcrux, he had no idea about Voldemort's situation other than a guess that Voldemort was behind his name coming out of Goblet. He hoped if Narcissa could provide any lead into Voldemort's current situation. Narcissa continued, yesterday, after the Wizengamot hearing, Lucius arrived home very late at night. Although he was frantic about the money he have returned to you, he had a glint in his eyes. A glint of expectation. As if something was going to happen. She said, from his actions and expression I can assume that something big is going to happen, in few days. Harry raised his eyebrows, no idea what. Narcissa shook her head. And the other information? Questioned Harry. The Dark Lord has someone in close proximity to you, keeping an eye on you and manipulating things from inside, said Narcissa. Most probably, he was responsible for your name coming from the goblet. Snape? Asked tentatively. Narcissa shook her head. Severus Snape has lost his trust with the Dark Lord. Snape is outside Azkaban only because Dumbledore had intervened. And Dumbledore is no fool. Without any expected benefits, the old man would have never helped Snape. In addition to this, Dumbledore allowed Snape to run unbridled in Hogwarts for so many years. She continued, the Dark Lord will understand this. Although he would still keep Snape close but only for Snape's talent in potions brewing. She concluded, not Snape but some else. Harry did not speak anything and kept standing. If not Snape, then who? Muttered Harry in his mind. Every name he knew, flashed into his mind but Harry could not make out anything from any name. Few moments later, he knew it in daze. Narcissa responded with a smile while Harry vanished from the hall. November 1994. Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Harry appeared inside his room in the Chamber of Secrets. His mind kept wondering about the 2 pieces of information Narcissa had told him but could not figure out anything. After few minutes, Harry sighed and put the matter at the back of his head. He sat down at his chair and looked at the sealed piece of the envelope lying on his table. James and Lily's will. As per the order of Madame Marchbanks, the will had been delivered yesterday. Harry with hesitant hands unsealed the envelope and pulled the letters from inside. He unfolded the first letter. It was from James. Greetings everyone. If this letter is being read, it means I must have died. And for this to happen, Peter Pettigrew must have betrayed me. Sirius, you should have remained our secret keeper. The idea of you to set a target on yourself was not a good prank. Oh. I forgot one thing, maybe we have lost and the people who are reading the will are Voldemort's shit-eater. Then fuck you. Harry chuckled and continued reading. Now the will. Well, I have not taken up the Potter Lordship on Dumbledore's suggestion, so technically I do not own many things besides my own vault. Harry's eyebrows furrowed. It was as Sharptooth, his vault manager at Gringotts, had guessed. Dumbledore persuaded his father to not take up the lordship. Mentioned in Chapter 21, Learning Some Truth. Lily, if you are alive, know that I love you, take care of our son and don't allow him near that dog. Harry, if your mom is not with you and when you are old enough to understand this, know that I loved you and I loved your mom. Everything I own, if not mentioned otherwise, belongs to you. Sirius, you are brother I could have asked for. Take care of your godson for me and please keep him away from your pranks. I believe you are too rich on your own to need anything. Remus, you are another brother to me, a voice of sanity between the insanity. Although, you are too stubborn, I leave you 20,000 galleons from my vault. Live a good life and protect Harry. Harry did not have much reaction about Remus Lupin. His thoughts regarding about Remus had gone under few changes. He needed answers. Peter, you are a traitor. I don't what to say to a man who betrayed his friends. Die of shame. To my favorite professor, Minerva McGonagall, you have been a constant ray of light guiding me on the path. And know that, I loved pulling pranks on you, your stern face makes me laugh like nothing. I know money is not something you want. To you I leave, copies of 2 books on advanced transfiguration from the Potter family library. Harry, when you become Lord Potter, allow for the copies to remain in her possession. You can trust her. Professor, be the mother my son needs. In the last, I would mention my few of my friends. Amelia Bones, you have been a big sister for me, but please stop being so overbearing. Frank and Alice Longbottom, you have been dear friends for me. Hopefully, you let your son, Neville, become friends with Harry. Few objects from my vault have been marked for some other people. Consider it my last act of friendship. Goodbye. Harry was intrigued a lot reading the will. It was too short. The longest he had written was for Minerva, and surprisingly she had been referred to as James' favorite professor, not Dumbledore. And other than James telling that Dumbledore suggested him to not take up the lordship, the old coot had not been mentioned. Considering how the relationship between his parents and Dumbledore had been portrayed, there was no doubt some messaging hidden in the will. Chapter 116, Lily's Will. November 1994. Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Harry kept James' letter at side and picked up the second letter. Lily's Will. Greetings. To think that I would die while hiding away. Only if Headmaster had listened to us and had launched a frontal attack on Voldemort, but he kept saying the now is not the time. But the time has come for us. Another disguised remark on Dumbledore, muttered Harry. Dear Harry, your mum truly loves you. You must know that I am not as rich as your father. He has a mountain of galleon in his own vault. I can only imagine how much the Potter family would have. Even so, after I started working I saved some money. Everything belongs to you. In addition to that, I own a small but beautiful house somewhere. It was a spot where I found solidarity. The house also belongs to you. Now another important thing is that who will rise you? This is the order of the preference from our side. 1. Pandora Lovegood and Xenophilius Lovegood. Don't teach him about Nargles, please. 2. Alice Longbottom and Frank Longbottom. 3. Minerva McGonagall. 4. Amelia Bones. If everyone in the list is not available or not ready to accept Harry, he can live at any magical orphanage. In no case he should be allowed to live at any other magical family house. In no case should my son be allowed to live with my sister, Petunia, and her husband, Vernon Dudley. Goodbye. Harry stared at the letter for few times and sighed. As expected, his mother very well understood the nature of her sister and her husband. He was never meant to grow there, and Harry any day would have preferred an orphanage over his aunt's family. Harry then looked at the last piece of paper and picked it up. He was confused as the paper was completely empty. But an empty paper with the letters of the will? Harry frowned for few moments before his lips spread into a smile. He placed his finger on the paper and muttered, "I solemnly swear that I am up to no good." The page stirred and paragraphs of written handwritings appeared on the letter. Dear Harry /Padfoot /Mooney. Hopefully, you three are only one reading the letter. In the past few days, when I am writing this on October 26, 1981, things have started to get worse. It has been many days since I have had contact with both of you, Sirius and Remus. I don't know for sure, but I believe that Dumbledore is pulling the strings, preventing both of you from contacting me. This may come as surprise, but I don't know how to explain. Dumbledore has prevented me from taking the lordship. I wanted, but he almost forced me to not go to Gringotts. 2 days back we have had an intense argument. Lily could not understand. Why are we hiding? Will hiding here kill Voldemort? Why doesn't he gather his Order of Phoenix and engage with Voldemort? Everyone says, I don't know who, that Voldemort only fears Dumbledore? Then in why in so much time, Dumbledore had not tried to find Voldemort? How much time we will hide? Harry, there is an invisibility cloak which I owned. Few weeks back, Dumbledore asked me to borrow it, and the fool I was, I gave it to him. Now when we are hiding, I thought it would have been very helpful for us to escape, but now he is making reasons. Thankfully, I had forced him to take a magical oath to return it back when you turn 11. Lily will take over now. Dear Harry, I love you so much. Things are getting out of control as of now. I am really annoyed. Why do we have to hide? I have a hunch that Dumbledore is up to something. He is hiding things from us. Harry, if you are alive to read this, live a good life. Make friends and build a family. He. And trust people wisely. I don't want to admit, but we made a mistake in trusting Dumbledore blindly. Love you, Harry, my son. Goodbye. Harry sighed deeply in frustration. Even his parents had picked up the hints about Dumbledore's manipulation. But even so, they had been trapped so deep that they had no way out. By the time Harry was finished, it was already afternoon. Having nothing to do, he lied down and went into a nap. By the time Harry woke up, it was already evening. Harry apparat and arrived in front of the headmaster's office. He moved forward and knocked on the gate. Come in, came Minerva's voice. Harry pushed the door and entered inside. Harry, said Minerva. Good evening, Professor, greeted Minerva. Good evening, Harry, greeted back Minerva. Harry did not said anything and took out 2 old bundles of pages tied in threads. Minerva raised her eyebrows, asking what was that? Harry placed the James wool on the table. Only the section which referred to Minerva was visible to her. She picked the wool and started reading. The more she read, more her eyes turned moist. At the end, tears rolled down her cheek. I am sorry, Harry, she muttered in a whisper. The sentence "be the mother my son needs" was echoing in her mind. Harry shook his head. What has happened, Professor. No need to regret over things which cannot be altered, continued Harry. We must look into future. You can be the mentor and the guidance I need now, added Harry. Chapter 117, Narcissa in Hogwarts. November 1994. Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Dinner was going in full flow in Hogwarts Great Hall. The hall was buzzing in anticipation of the Dumbledore's trial, which was going to resume the next day. A very noticeable change which had happened was the absence of the throne-like chair behind the teacher's table. Unlike Dumbledore, who was a man of grandeur, Minerva was a simplistic woman. The throne had now been replaced by a wooden chair. It was slightly bigger than the rest of the chairs, indicating it being a headmaster's chair, but it was nothing special. At the moment the doors of the hall opened with a bang. Just like previous night, Harry walked in with an expressionless face. He walked up to the podium and turned around and faced the students. "Good evening," said Harry. "In the long list of announcement I had made yesterday, one thing was about Severus Snape abandoning his position and running away. Fortunately, I have found a competent replacement for him," added Harry. This brought the students and the professors alike on their edge of seats. "Well, this does not matter, as anyone would be more competent than Snape," smirked Harry, causing few giggles, especially at the Gryffindor table. Harry gestured his hands towards the door. "Please welcome your new potions professor and head of the Slytherin house." The door opened again, but this time gently, not in same flare as Harry. In walked Narcissa Malfoy, amidst the shocked gazes of everyone. The entire hall was in pin-drop silence, taking time to process what was happening. Even the expression on Professor's face was that of shock and astonishment. Draco Malfoy had his mouth hung open in shock. Narcissa was about to reach the podium, when he could not control himself anymore. He stood up. "Mom, what are you doing here? Did Dad allow it?" Narcissa ignored the question and Draco gritted his teeth in anger. Narcissa stood on the podium as elegant and regal as ever. She faced the crowd. She addressed, "For those who don't know me, I am Narcissa Black." The title Black caused murmurs in the hall, especially among the students who were versed in the laws of Wizarding World. Even the Muggle-raised understood what leaving the husband's title and taking back father's title meant. Meanwhile Narcissa continued, "Many of you would be having many doubts and questions about my personal life, choices I make, to everything going on in with me and my life." She sighed, "Although I know this would be useless, I still advise you to not dwell in things which have no effect on you all. My qualification in potion brewing and my competency in leading the Slytherin house is what should be your priority and more important." She continued, "Yes, I admit, I lack the experience of being a teacher, but everyone starts at some point. I had an O in N.E.W.T.S in potions, and along with this I have not slacked and continued brewing potions. I promise that I will put in all my effort into my teaching." Everyone heard Narcissa with rapt attention. Draco was still standing with an expression of shock. He could not understand all what was happening. His parents had taken a divorce? He did not understand a thing. Narcissa took a step back, while Harry stepped forward. "You heard her well," said Harry. "Please cooperate with her. If any issues arises because of this arrangement, I will deal with it personally," announced Harry. "Miss Black, please, take your seat," said Harry to Narcissa. Amidst the shocked and unbelievable gazes of everyone present, Narcissa walked in and took her seat on which Snape sat previously. "Headmaster McGonagall," said Harry. "Please see to that class schedules and syllabus are handed to Professor Black. Also, please see to her living arrangements. She will be hold the position tentatively for 1 month, and if no issues arises, then only we will proceed to sign the magical contract," added Harry further. With his last words Harry started to walk back towards the door when Draco was still standing like a clown, almost jumped and ran over from his table and stood blocking Harry's path. "Potter," he screamed, his face contorted in anger. "What do you think you are doing? I tell you, stop this nonsense." He was cut across by Harry. "Malfoy." Harry's voice was as cold as ice. "Before you do or say anything more foolish, think well about the consequences it would bring upon you." Draco gazed at the blazing green eyes of Harry and could not help but remember the scene of what had happened to those 4 Slytherin students. He shuddered and flinched back in fear. Harry ignored the trembling ferret and walked away from the Great Hall. Today, unlike what he did regularly, Harry did not apparate to his chamber. He decided to take a stroll among the corridors of Hogwarts. He was walking aimlessly on the 7th floor when his eyes caught a blonde girl skipping her way among the corridors. Harry frowned seeing Luna in the corridors during the dinner time. He wondered if the Nargles had created problems for her again. He checked on her to find that she was wearing her shoes and clothes were not disheveled. Her wand was clipped on her right ears. Harry decided that it would be good to talk to Luna. After the incident regarding her, he had hardly exchanged few words with her. He moved towards her and rapidly closed the distance. "Miss Lovegood," said Harry. "I wonder if the Nargles are still." Harry was in middle of his question when Luna took an abrupt turn towards the wall of the corridor. Amidst the shocked gaze of Harry, Luna walked and vanished inside the wall. He as a Hogwarts owner could feel everything in the castle. But he could not feel a thing from where Luna vanished. No secret passages, no secret rooms, nothing. After meeting the Peverell brothers and gaining their experience and knowledge, this had been the first time when Harry had been shocked to his core. If you are enjoying my story, support me at PayPal https://www.paypal.me/novelcorner. Got my Patreon. Support me if you like my story. 5 advanced chapters and my other fanfiction available. patreon.com/novelcorner. Replace at with a. Thank you for reading. Rate, review, and comment on my novel. Also send the Power Stones. Comment. 11 comment. Vote. Chapter 118, Announcement. Hello readers. Thanks all for your support. First of all, I apologize for not being able to upload in the past 3 days. Well, I do not want to be dramatic, but as you all have been constant in your support, I must clarify. To say the least, few things have not been going well in my life. Definitely this ranges from personal to financial problems, and I must admit that writing is a sort of comfort for me. But in some situations, it is hard to concentrate and write. News about the future releases. Maybe I could be inconsistent for the next 3 days and hopefully, things will start change towards betterment. Chapter 119, Luna's Strangeness. November 1994. Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Harry was shocked to his core. He in quick steps reached the walls and started inspecting it. The only case in which he could feel nothing behind the walls was only possible if something like the Room of Requirements or the Chamber of Secrets, independent of the Hogwarts castle, existed behind it. Not discovering anything, Harry closed his eyes and focused on the Hogwarts wards, trying to locate Luna. To his utter astonishment, Harry located her at the 5th floor. Secret room or some hidden structure like Chamber of Secrets would have been a mild shock for Harry, but Luna's presence on 5th floor rattled him to the core. It implied that Luna had teleported to the 5th floor, but it was not apparition, as Harry had not felt the twist of the space when she had disappeared. Harry did not dwindle and operate away on the 5th floor behind Luna. Just as he was to speak, Luna vanished, again. Harry's eyes widened in shock and disbelief. He again focused on the wards and found Luna very close to the Ravenclaw house. She was walking towards the dormitory. Not willing to take any chances, Harry operated directly in front of Luna. Any normal person would have been startled on Harry's abrupt presence, but Luna was Luna. She had no visible reaction. Harry Potter. Her voice dreamy. It has been so long. Harry gave a stiff smile. Yes, Luna. He asked hesitantly, Luna, how did you arrive here from the 7th floor? The blonde girl looked confusedly at Harry as if not understanding his question. Moments later, as if she was struck by realization, you are talking about the path which is glowing. Glowing paths? Asked Harry with a frown. You don't see them, said Luna. Harry shook his head in denial. Luna tried to explain, these paths glow yellow. I just follow them and reach wherever I want. They work strangely, but most of the times it takes me wherever I want, added Luna. More importantly, they only work if I completely walk along the glowing path. If I even miss a single step, they do not work. Harry furrowed his brows, further contemplating the information. Looking at Harry's face, she comforted him, don't worry. I also started to see them after you freed me from the Nargles. Maybe in future when you would be free from Nargles, you will also be able to see them. Harry chuckled. He understood this was the best Luna could explain him. Even so, he felt that now he had a rudimentary understanding of what was happening. He changed the topic. Do Nargles disturb you now? Luna shook her head. No. I feel their presence nearby. But one approaches me. They have also stopped taking my things away. Harry smiled. Good to hear this. Bye then, see you later, said Harry. Luna smiled. Bye, Harry Potter. And she walked towards her dormitory. Harry was also to walk away when he heard Luna, Harry Potter, I see 2 big Nargles approaching you. You should be careful, she added. Harry smiled and muttered, is she referring to Dumbledore and Voldemort? Even so, he did not pay much attention to it. Truly a unique personality, whispered Harry. Mum would have surely loved her goddaughter, he added in a sad voice. Harry continued his stroll while walking towards the Chamber of Secrets, his mind wandering with thoughts related to Luna. The design of the Hogwarts had been built by the co-founders together. But Rowena Ravenclaw was the one had laid the foundation of all the wards in the Hogwarts. Both, Salazar Slytherin and Godric Gryffindor were no slouch in wards and runes. But in their writings, they had admitted that Rowena was a true genius in wards and runes. Godric Gryffindor had also mentioned that Rowena was so brilliant in runes that she could overpower many excellent wizards in duel based only on her runes. And Harry was certain that the yellow glow that Luna mentioned were nothing but runes. These runes were independent of the Hogwarts wards and hence Harry could not feel its presence. Now for whatsoever reasons, Luna was not only able to see those runes but she also understood their uses. She used them to move freely inside Hogwarts. Harry had a fledgling guess about what was happening but he could not be very certain unless confirmed. He sighed deeply and walked back to the chamber. While Harry was walking back to his chamber of secrets, a certain event was taking place. In a very dimly lit room, which had a chilly and eerie feeling, a group of around a dozen wizards which included many prominent names including Lucius Malfoy, Tiberius Nott, and Severus Snape were kneeling on the ground in front of a wooden chair. On the chair seated was Voldemort, in his ugly and disgusting child body. Nagini was slithering around the chair, wrapped on its armrest. His screech-like voice echoed in the room, "Are all the preparations done, Lucius?" Lucius was hesitant, "Yes, my lord, but this lowly slave believes that, ambushing Harry would be..." Before he could complete his words, a red beam hit across his chest, sending him flying. "When I ask questions, give answers, Lucius," thundered Voldemort. "Don't give opinions." The child body turned its head towards Snape. "Snape, you have left me disappointed." Snape hastened, "My lord, all I did was to serve you. For years, I have collected information about Dumbledore and Harry and their weaknesses." Voldemort remained nonchalant, "Don't take me for a fool, Snape." His voice turned angry, "You all thought, I was gone, that I was dead. You all celebrated that you were free, freedom which came at the price of renouncing my name." Everyone kneeling had sweats running on their back. Their faces filled with trace of fear and panic. "You all wished that, I never return back," he laughed like a madman. "But I am back, and I will rule this world again." Chapter 120, Resumption of Trial. November 1994. Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Next day after the announcement of Narcissa as new potions professor and head of the Slytherin house, this was the buzz in the wizarding world. Newspapers, which should have had news about resumption of Dumbledore's trial, had their front pages plastered with the image of Harry and Narcissa standing on the podium of the Hogwarts Great Hall. Raising the temperature further was the vague acceptance from Narcissa's mouth about her divorce from Lucius. Harry's enmity with Lucius was no secret, and what had happened in the previous hearing was a further testament to this. And now Narcissa divorcing Lucius and then walking straight to Harry's side raised many eyebrows. The Daily Prophet had written a scathing attack on Narcissa, even to the extent of calling her a gold digger. The Malfoys turning poor after their debt settlement with the Black family and her divorce the very next moment led to widespread acceptance of this view. Narcissa's composure never changed as she read the newspaper and enjoyed her breakfast in the Great Hall. Only a subtle smile on her face was the only visible reaction she had given. November 1994. Ministry of Magic. Harry along with Minerva arrived in the atrium of the Ministry. Tearing apart the vulture-like crowd, they finally arrived in the Wizengamot Hall. Minerva walked to her seat. From this hearing onwards, she was going to have an additional vote as her status had changed from vice-headmistress to headmistress of Hogwarts. The seat and the vote for the vice-headmaster remained unoccupied. Harry took his seat on his throne-like chair and gave a nod to Andromeda, who was standing in the well. As was Harry's usual habit, he checked on the members sitting on the hall. He found Amelia Bones, who gave him a smile. Sinus Greengrass was also sitting among the members. Lucius Malfoy was also present with his stern face. Even so, Harry noted few abstentions. The Crabbe and Goyle lords were absent, and so was Tiberius Nott. Few minutes were remaining for the beginning of the trial. Dumbledore entered the hall just before the gates of the Wizengamot closed. "It seems, I made it in time," chuckled Dumbledore. "Let us begin," said Madame Marchbanks sitting on the chair of Chief Warlock. "Mrs. Tonks, you can continue your arguments from where you had stopped in the previous hearing." Andromeda walked in the center of the well. "Thank you, Madame Marchbanks." She gazed all around the hall. "Before I move forward in my arguments, I would want a quick jog to memories about the previous hearing and few facts which we had established in the last hearing. First is definitely the clear admission from Dumbledore that he intentionally misled the investigation and also allowed for one of the major evidences in form of any magical residue left on the goblet go to waste. She continued, second is revelation about Dumbledore misusing his authority as Chief Warlock to seal the will of James and Lily Potter in an inappropriate manner and forcibly taking up the position of the magical guardian of Harry Potter. Third is his continuous negligence for 11 years, starting from sending Hagrid to a dangerous place to never visiting Harry Potter and checking on him, added Andromeda further. I must stress the fact that as its implication, when Harry entered the wizarding world, he had no idea about anything. He had no understanding of what a wizard or witch is. What magic is. The members of the council listened in with rapt attention with expressionless face. All what was being said by Andromeda had already been established in the previous hearing. She was just summarizing things. Andromeda smiled, an evil smile. Now, before we proceed. She faced Dumbledore. Tell me, Albus Dumbledore, who is responsible for introducing the Muggle-born and Muggle-raised to the world of magic. Dumbledore was calm, the vice-headmistress, in this case Minerva McGonagall. And who introduced Harry Potter? Asked back Andromeda. Hagrid, replied Dumbledore with amusement. Before she could say anything, Dumbledore continued, and before you ask, as a headmaster I have enough discretion in my hands. It would neither be viable nor humanly possible to explain every little decision I undertook in my official capacity. Sometimes such condition does arise when we have to take decisions based on discretions, added Dumbledore. Andromeda still remained calm, but her first attack to paint further negligence from Dumbledore had failed. She nodded. Let us then move to the Hogwarts batch of 1991-92. Esteemed members of the council, echoed Andromeda's voice. You may not have been aware, but that year, Hogwarts was home for one of the most valuable artifacts in the world. Everyone's expression turned into that of an intrigue and curiosity. Hidden by defenses by so powerful, that it required 3, Andromeda drew everyone to their edge of the seat. 3 wizards and witches in a first year to breach these protections to reach the Philosopher's Stone. The entire audience gasped in shock, while Madame Marchbanks asked sternly, Mrs. Tonks, do you understand what are you saying? Only one person has the Philosopher's Stone. Trailed Madame Marchbanks, her sentence incomplete but meaning complete. Andromeda was calm. Why don't we ask, Albus Dumbledore, what was the Philosopher's Stone doing in Hogwarts? Dumbledore, though calm but was still slightly annoyed. Typically, at any other place, he would have fed the logic that Nicholas Flamel had asked for protection of the stone. But he could not use that reason here. Firstly, there was a good chance that Nicholas himself will read the news, and secondly, he knew that Andromeda would mock him, that why would Nicholas Flamel, who had kept the stone for centuries, would require his sudden protection. Chapter 121, Resumption of Trial, 2. Thank you for the patience and your support in my tough times. Things are back to a certain degree of normalcy. Daily updates from now. November 1994. Ministry of Magic. Dumbledore steeled his face with a calm expression and looked around. Having no other option, Dumbledore had to come clean. Mr. Flamel, as many of you are already aware of, is a dear friend of mine, said Dumbledore. And I was, or am currently doing some research in field of alchemy. We met just before the beginning of the school year at Hogwarts, and I expressed to him that I needed some help for my alchemy research, which required the Philosopher's Stone assistance. This caused a small murmur among the members of the Wizengamot. Anything which required the help of the Philosopher's Stone would be no small thing. Everyone was intrigued about the research Dumbledore was conducting. Considering our decades-old relationship, Mr. Flamel was willing to help me, said Dumbledore. He continued, in the meantime, while I brought the stone with me, a certain news reached me, a news about a wraith vying the stone. Technically, this is nothing new, as there is no lack of individuals who are willing to go to great lengths to get the stone, but my sources told me that this time the threat is real. Dumbledore's face was calm and serene. To check whether what I was told is really true or not, I deliberately leaked the news of Stone's presence in one of the safest place of the Wizarding Britain, Gringotts. Realization struck the members while Dumbledore continued, now as you all can remember, this individual was really capable. The individual was actually able to breach the security of Gringotts, announced Dumbledore, confirming what everyone was thinking. Having ascertained that the threat is real, I had 2 choices: to either keep the stone hidden while the threat would have continued, or to confront the threat, to lure him and eliminate him permanently. I chose the second option. He was about to continue when Andromeda giggled, you are quite funny, Albus Dumbledore. Now you would say that you announced to the whole world about the Philosopher's Stone, so that you could bait the wraith, yet your traps were so weak that even Lord Harry Potter in his first year had the stone in his hands. This statement brought the entire Wizengamot to a standstill. Harry Potter had the legendary stone in his hands? Can you please explain, what are you talking about, Mrs. Tonks? Inquired Madame Marchbanks. Andromeda smiled, why not? With this she began the tale from the beginning to the end. It included Harry's broom going out of control and him doubting Snape for it, doubting Snape for trying to steal whatever was on the third floor, but ultimately finding Quirrell possessed by a wraith in the end and Quirrell death. The entire hall was in stunned silence. The silence was broken by Minerva's flare of magic and her angry shout, Dumbledore, you told us that the wraith had escaped and though Quirrell was injured he would live. She questioned with a disbelieving look, you hid a death in Hogwarts. Amelia remarked sarcastically, it seems that Dumbledore's prestige is nothing but air, every protection he creates is breached as if they are thin threads. Dumbledore's expression did not even falter, you may think that everything I said or did is some big conspiracy. He turned towards Andromeda, but I believe, Mrs. Tonks, that you would not be that foolish to say that the breach of Gringotts was a hoax. He smirked, you would not be too foolish to say that goblins were part of my conspiracy. He continued, his voice a note higher, for a person who breached the security of goblins, tell me what kind of trap would have held him. He continued, his presence dominating, the traps were never meant to hold the intruder. It was just a means to lure him into the final stage. To give him a false sense of complacency. I myself was the final stage, boomed Dumbledore, his magic running rampant in the hall but still not out of his control. He chuckled, as for, Lord Potter. His tone mocking, I would say two things. It was at his own accord and his mindless doubts of Snape trying to steal whatever was at the third floor that he entered the traps. I did not ask or forced him to do so. Even if Snape or someone else was trying to steal something, it was not his job to go after him. He was supposed to be sleeping in his dormitory. He broke rules, broke what I had prohibited, and yet someone I am the conspirator. He mocked, or maybe even now, Mrs. Tonks would say that I conspired so big that Harry Potter had to walk in the traps. Secondly, Harry Potter never held the Philosopher's Stone, it was a false replica, the stone was forever in my pockets. He announced, no doubt, what plans I had did not happen exactly that way, but you cannot pin all the blame on me. He chuckled, I don't understand what wild one's imagination must be to link all this to a huge conspiracy I planned just to harm Harry Potter. Do the world really thinks me of such a fool that for 14 years, I have planned such big conspiracies and yet every time Harry Potter comes unscathed? Questioned Dumbledore. What aim could I have? Maybe to kill him? To harm him, why would I deliberate such measures? Why can't I have used direct methods? What was stopping me? Silence ensued in the hall while Dumbledore stood tall gazing at everyone with magic flickering in his eyes. It was during these kinds of moments when the world understood why was Dumbledore called to be among the strongest wizard to ever live. His mere presence inspired awe among the weaker wizards. Chapter 122, Dumbledore's Arguments. November 1994. Ministry of Magic. Dumbledore's little fiery questions produced another perspective of thought in the mind of the members of Wizengamot. It was as he described. If Dumbledore really wanted to harm or kill Harry, why would he have to plant such conspiracies? With the power and the influence Dumbledore had, he could have done as he wished. He kept Harry Potter hidden for 11 years and yet no one dared to question him. Then why such conspiracies? And even if Dumbledore really planned all the conspiracies, would he really fail in every one of it? What purpose did these conspiracies serve Dumbledore? Meanwhile in the well of the Wizengamot, Dumbledore's aura remained tall and imposing. He was not over yet. Any incident big or small, continued Dumbledore, can be linked to me as an architect of some conspiracy just because I was there as Hogwarts headmaster. Let us consider Harry's confrontation with the troll, added Dumbledore. Indeed, Professor Quirrell possessed by a wraith was able to bring a troll in Hogwarts. But was it me who caused Harry to face a life and death situation with the mindless creature? No, declared Dumbledore. It was Harry Potter's decision to follow his friend who wanted to satisfy her curiosity of witnessing a troll in flesh and blood. Harry Potter defied a simple instruction from me to follow the prefects to their respective houses. And yet I am the conspirator. He questioned and faced Andromeda Tonks. No. Mrs. Tonks, he smirked. At most you can call me out for my incompetency in failing to keep the school safe. Not a conspirator. And I believe, he eyed Harry. Lord Slytherin have already dealt me my punishment for my incompetency. Dumbledore with his words was turning the tide in his favour. It was as he said. He could be called for his failure in maintaining the security, but it was Harry Potter who mindlessly jumped into a life and death situation without thinking of its consequences. And this is not the only example, continued Dumbledore. Most of you would be aware of the petrification of students which happened 2 years back. But what many don't know the cause behind it, said Dumbledore, his voice deep. It was the legendary basilisk of the Slytherin causing those petrification, announced Dumbledore, causing murmurs in the hall. And it was Harry Potter along with his best friend Ron Weasley who in a magnificent feat of bravery slaughtered the basilisk and rescued a girl student who was taken away by the basilisk. This news further caused sensation in the hall. Harry Potter slaughtering a basilisk was a news that very few people were aware of. On the other hand, Harry gritted his teeth in irritation. Firstly, because of Dumbledore's reference to Ron Weasley as his best friend. And secondly, by the manipulative words of Dumbledore in revealing the story of the second year. Dumbledore very conveniently forgot the part about how the whole school treated him during the entire year, calling him heir of Slytherin. Dumbledore had taken the advantage of being the first mover by molding the story as per his wish. And even if Harry explained the reason for the act he was about to be accused by Dumbledore, he would just explain. He would not be able to use that to generate opinions in his favor. To generate sympathy for him. In the well, Dumbledore continued, even if I applaud and praise Harry for his bravery, one thing cannot be ignored. His reckless method of jumping in the Chamber of Secrets, again putting himself in a life and death situation. This again cannot be called a conspiracy, as Harry of his own accord rushed in danger. I at most can again be called for my failure in finding out the basilisk, sighed Dumbledore. Or maybe not, as it was believed to be nothing more than a myth, a legend. Even so, I have been already punished for it, maybe even 2 times, chuckled Dumbledore. That year, the Board of Education for Hogwarts removed me from my position of headmaster for some time, and now Lord Slytherin have done the same. Andromeda, who had been quiet till now, interrupted, no doubt, what you say makes Dumbledore. But was all of it really a coincidence? She questioned in shrill voice. Hogwarts, which was a calm lake even during the rise of he who must not be named, suddenly turned into a chaotic ocean. Her voice echoed, the very same year, Lord Potter steps back into Wizarding World, you conduct an alchemy experiment, someone tries to steal the Philosopher's Stone, you lay a trap to lure the thief into Hogwarts, which is full of students, and Harry is miraculously caught in the storm. She continued, was it really a coincidence, that when anyone rarely encounters something like Mirror of East, Lord Potter encounters the famed arty craft during a random stroll in Hogwarts? For the second year, a creature which no had encountered or even found a conclusive evidence for in centuries, suddenly surfaces in Hogwarts and started petrifying students. She questioned, was it all really a coincidence, happening when Harry Potter was at Hogwarts? She continued, I agree that Lord Potter recklessly jumped into Chamber of Secrets, but what condition arose that he had to do so? Why did he have to take a job which belonged to you, to Hogwarts professors, in his own hands? She faced Dumbledore, if you are not a fool to fail in every conspiracy you planned, is Lord Potter a fool to walk into every danger that comes in Hogwarts out of nowhere? Silence ensued in the hall as everyone weighed the arguments from both sides. Ironically, both sides made sense and sounded very reasonable when both were contradictory to each other. Things had started to get complex, and it was turning extremely tough to separate who was right and who was wrong. Chapter 123, Abrupt Happenings. November 1994. Ministry of Magic. Andromeda's counter-arguments were again able to create the balance in favor of Harry Potter. Even so, it was not leaning heavily in his side as much as before the trial had resumed for the day. Dumbledore's points had planted the seeds of confusion and uncertainty in the minds of members of the Wizengamot, and it was now not easy to remove these seeds. Dumbledore smiled in response to Andromeda's questions, what Mrs. Tonks said makes perfect sense. But what you imply, Mrs. Tonks, grinned Dumbledore, are merely speculations. You have no shred of proof to even slightly back your claims of me plotting against Harry. He faced towards the Chief Warlock, Madame Marchbanks, this is nothing but waste of the precious time of this esteemed body and its members. From day one, I have maintained that discussing the events of the past would yield no result, we need to focus on what happened during the selection of champions for the Triwizard Tournament. He continued, but what Mrs. Tonks has been doing from the start of the trial is merely narrating stories and making assumption out of it. He smirked, if she does have any evidence to support her claims, then she should put it in front of the council. Now that Harry Potter owns Hogwarts, he should have no problems in finding out at least few evidences of my wrongdoings. He could use some help and try to gather some evidence against me rather than wasting time in this useless story narration. And if Mrs. Tonks is merely interested in storytelling, then she could organize a grand function and speak before a larger audience, mocked Dumbledore. Or maybe using a newspaper would also be a good option, he added further. Madame Marchbanks, sitting at the chair of the chief warlock, had a serious expression on her face. She sighed deeply. Mrs. Tonks, although I sympathize with Lord Potter for all the mishaps that have occurred in his life, what Albus Dumbledore says makes sense. Andromeda tried to protest, Madame Marchbanks. But the old witch cut her off. Sitting on this chair, Madame Marchbanks continued, I must be impartial. I have given enough time to you to go beyond the scope of the case which we have been dealing. But you lack evidence. She added further, we will now move to the specifics of the case which we ought to deal with. She looked towards Amelia. Before I allow the two of you to argue, Madame Bones, please present all what you have been able to find out regarding the case. Amelia nodded and walked in the well. She faced the Wizengamot. For the past few days, since Lord Potter have registered his complaint, DMLE have been conducting a meticulous investigation. Let me talk about the conclusion which we have been able to arrive at, continued Amelia. Firstly, with the help of the Department of Mysteries, we were able to conclude that the goblet had been tampered with. She continued, a very powerful confundus charm was cast on the goblet. It made the arty craft to believe that not 3 but 4 schools were participating in the tournament, and Lord Potter's name was put in the goblet as the sole participant from this 4th school. As Mr. Dumbledore have already confessed, due to his inaction all magical traces on the goblet was lost, and it is not possible now to find out which wizard or witch cast the spell. She looked around and continued, the other point of contention is the age line. 2 points stand out with this regard. Firstly, the age line which was created by Dumbledore, sighed Amelia, was utterly useless. Not only that any average wizard or witch would have been able to breach the line through various methods, it also lacked in other aspects. For example, if a minor would have thrown his name into the goblet outside the age line, or maybe have used an elongated stick to put his name in the goblet, the age line would have detected nothing. What I am saying that the age line simply prevented anyone from crossing that line and not from putting his name in the goblet. This is kind of mistake which cannot be expected from someone as experienced as Albus Dumbledore. The goblet had no such compulsion to only choose from wizards or witches not of age, concluded Amelia. She continued, and now this brings us to our second point. As we are already aware, that a powerful magical contract is used to enforce the rules of the tournament, then why was the age limitation not added in the contract itself? She chuckled, and the answer to this question is that Albus Dumbledore decided that it would not be a good idea to tweak with the magical contract which have been used for centuries, and that an external protection would be enough. Dumbledore remained calm during whole time. Amelia continued, sadly no professor or student at Hogwarts have been able to report any suspicious activity which could have given us a lead in the case. Madame Marchbanks nodded, thank you, Madame Bones. She looked at Andromeda, Mrs. Tonks, you can begin now. Amelia was about to leave the well when Dumbledore interrupted her, sorry for my intrusion, Madame Bones. He added with a smile, although it was clear from your statements, I must ask it clearly. He asked, you have not been able to find a single evidence which could point that myself, Ludo Bagman or Barty Crouch have a direct involvement in Harry Potter's name coming out of the goblet. Is this true? Amelia felt irritated at Dumbledore's smiling face and him rubbing these things in her face, but she could only nod her head, yes, Mr. Dumbledore. What you said is indeed correct. Dumbledore chuckled, thank you, Madame Bones. Mrs. Tonks, the stage is all yours, said Dumbledore. Andromeda was about to open her mouth when the gates of the council were forcibly opened with a bang. 2 wizards dressed in the uniform of Aurors came running inside, and before anyone could understand what was happening, one of them screamed. Madame Bones, the Azkaban has been attacked by Death Eaters, said the Auror in trembling voice. A&D, another group was seen flying towards Hogwarts, finished the Auror. Chapter 124, Attack on Hogsmeade. My Patreon is back to 5 advanced chapters schedule, and as a compensation to my paid readers for my irregular updates and reduced no of chapter on Patreon, I will upload additional 3 advanced chapter on my Patreon. It means by the end of the week, Patreon will have 8 advanced chapters which will continue till the end of the story. You can check it out. November 1994. Ministry of Magic. The announcement from the Auror caused chaos in the entire council. Members of the Wizengamot were on their feet, shouting and behaving, not like esteemed lords but as vendors of fish market. In this chaos, the members failed to notice a smirk on the face of Lucius Malfoy, while another member, the Pink Toad, Dolores Umbridge had a shiny glint in her eyes. Harry remained unaffected from all this chaos, and in moments he jumped from his throne-like chair towards Minerva McGonagall. "Harry!" muttered Minerva, with fear and anxiety etched on her face. Normally, she would have not been so tensed, as breaching the Hogwarts wards was almost impossible. But the problem was that today was the day when the students of Hogwarts would have visited the Hogsmeade village. Harry was also aware of this fact. He wasted no time and took hold of Minerva's hands. In next moment, Harry along with Minerva vanished from the Wizengamot Hall. After they vanished, Amelia was the first to recover her wits. She scrambled to her feet and ran away towards the atrium so that she could apparate. Rufus Scrimgeour and the other two Aurors followed behind her in haste. November 1994. Hogsmeade Village. When the duo reappeared next, they were standing in the middle of the Hogsmeade Village. The entire village was in mayhem. The houses, shops, and various other establishments had been reduced to rubbles. Wizards and witches were running away. Not far away from Harry and Minerva, 8 Death Eaters in their black attire were laughing maniacally and firing spells after spell. Facing the Death Eaters were Hogwarts Professor. The half-goblin, Phileas Flitwick, was engaged with 2 Death Eaters. But his condition was not very good. His left non-wand arm was badly injured with blood dripping from it. His entire body was covered in cuts and bruises because of the various spells he had been hit with. While a world dueling champion, Flitwick would have had no problem in dealing with 2 above-average wizard. But the Death Eaters were not dueling, their purpose was to kill. And they fired the killing curse like candies, while Flitwick was restricted only to the so-called light spells. His entire focus was to avoid the killing curses, and hence he had been with the various other curses. Along with Flitwick, the other professors who were indulged in the duel were Septima Vector, Baths Haida Babbling, Pomona Sprout and Narcissa Malfoy. Spatima, Baths Haida, and Pomona, though decent witches, were no match for Death Eaters. Their specialty was never in dueling. Although alive, they were barely holding against the Death Eaters and were riddled with injuries. The only professor dominating the fight was Narcissa Malfoy, but she was not a professor in pure sense. Her spells were not restricted to the light spells, and barring the unforgivables, she was using even darker spells than the Death Eaters. A dead Death Eater lay in front of Narcissa, while the other one engaged her. The moment Harry appeared in Hogsmeade and looked at the destruction surrounding him, rage took over him. The entire magical reserve suppressed by him broke down, and as if a huge dam was broken, a ripple of magic spread with him at the center. The unprecedented phenomenon of this magical pulse attracted everyone's attention, and they stopped in their tracks. In rage, the Phoenix wand appeared in his hand, and Harry slashed his vertically upwards like a sword. A green beam of magical slash erupted from his wand, and one of the Death Eaters who was engaged with Phileas was sliced vertically into 2. Even at the last moment of his life, the Death Eater did not understand how he lost his life. Harry's action snapped everyone from their daze, and the Death Eaters retreated 2 steps back in fear. The glowing green eyes as if pulsing magic, the magical ripple from Harry and his ruthless action of slicing one of their comrades in half made their heart palpate with fear. Next moment, 12 more figures dressed in their Death Eater attires stormed out from different corners of the Hogsmeade village. No doubt these were placed to ambush Harry, their only target Harry Potter. Seeing the addition Death Eaters, Harry did not falter a bit. The last time he had fought the Death Eaters during the Triwizard World Cup final, he had not been accustomed to his power. Even with his overwhelming strength, he was not able to dominate the fight. But this time he was different. He was already used to his power. What he lacked the previous time, experience, was not lacking this time. The memories of the Peverell brothers along with Voldemort's memories made him more experienced than any other known wizard. Harry stepped forward. "Good, you dare to invade Hogwarts." His magical pulsed once again. "You will pay the price. Professor McGonagall, Professor Flitwick, and Professor Black, you will help me kill these scum," said Harry without turning. "The remaining professors will help evacuate the students and any other civilian," added Harry. Minerva tried to protest, as this formation would give an undue advantage to the Death Eaters in their numbers. "Harry." But Harry cut her across. "Do as I told." Narcissa twirled the wand in her hand and smirked like a predator. "Gladly. Even though I may not recognize all of you, there must be few of those scums who used to gaze at me lecherously," she whispered, her voice deep. "Now is the time for the world to remember what a black can do," declared Narcissa, and with this a glowing red spell left her wand. Chapter 125, Battle of Hogsmeade. November 1994. Hogsmeade Village. Harry along with Minerva McGonagall, Narcissa Black, and Phileas Flitwick stood facing 20 Death Eaters. The remaining professors followed Harry's words and scrambled to help the students and residents of the Hogsmeade village. Harry, although confident in his abilities, understood that he was at disadvantage in this battle. The Death Eaters had overwhelming advantage in numbers. Also, they would have no worries about the collateral damage of the civilian population or the surroundings, but Harry could not go on rampage. Harry pointed his wand and jabbed it forwards. Streams of fire started to erupt from his wand, and in no time, it took the shape of a huge bird. "Fiend fire," muttered one of the Death Eaters who was supposedly their leaders. Harry's choice of spell was to bridge the numerical gap between the two sides. Fiend fire was a large area spell and could damage to a larger area. The bird enormously increased in size, and with a swirl of Harry's wand it shot forwards towards the Death Eaters. Although a water elemental spell was the best way to counter to fiend fire, elemental spells required exceptional power and talent to cast them, and none of the Death Eaters were capable of this feat. Even so, the leading Death Eater took a battle-ready stance and pointed his wand. "Shield with me," he shouted. Following his action, all the other Death Eaters also raised their wand and in simultaneous actions jabbed their wands forward. Transparent magical erupted from their wands, but the shields did not remain close to their bodies. Instead, all the shields flew forwards and combined together to form a large shield, reddish transparent shield. Meanwhile, Harry's fiend fire was already upon them and it collided with the shield. A shockwave erupted from the collision and the magical shield cracked a bit. The Death Eaters retreated 2 steps but held on to their wands, and the shield contended with the fire bird. Harry was again in action and another spell left his wand. Bombarda Maxima struck the shield and it shattered on impact, and almost all of the Death Eaters were flung few steps backwards. The fiend fire, though now weak after losing its magical supply from Harry, had still not disappeared, and it flew towards the disoriented Death Eaters. They were not able to react in time, and the enormous bird scorched almost half of them before finally dying down. Almost 10 of the Death Eaters groaned in pain, their body and face charred black. Luckily, no one had died, and albeit weaker, they could still fight. The leader of the Death Eaters gazed at Harry with hatred. "You dirty blood will pay for this." Harry merely smirked at this and smiled in amusement. The smile caused a feeling of fear and dread inside the leader's heart. His eyes wandered on Harry's wand arm and found it to be simply hanging from his shoulder. Relief washed over the Death Eater's mind, but this relief was momentary. Harry's first attack was not over yet. A loud and shrill hoot echoed in the Hogsmeade village, and before anyone could understand, barrage of thunder rained down at the Death Eaters. The Death Eaters, already disoriented from the previous attack, went into a mode of panic. Their reaction time was late, and it took them some seconds to form shields to protect them. In moments 3 Death Eaters were struck to death by the lightning. Their bodies slumped down, terrorizing the remaining Death Eaters. Another 3 Death Eaters were struck by lightning, and though alive, they were badly injured. Everyone gazed up and to their utmost shock found a little white owl flying overhead. Hedwig's body was covered in small bolts of lightning. One of the Death Eaters was quick and fired a killing curse at Hedwig. But Hedwig gave another loud hoot as if mocking the idiot and vanished from the spot. Although Hedwig's lightning attacks from air while Harry battled the Death Eaters on the ground would have given him an astronomical advantage, it was not possible. This one attack was limit of what Hedwig could do for now. Harry wanted the full element of surprise, and Hedwig had used every bit of her power in the attack, holding nothing back. Now, she needed time to recover. Harry's strategy was a miraculous success, as he had been able to kill 3 Death Eaters and injured more than 10 of the Death Eaters in a blink of eye. "Your turn now," said Harry to the professors, and moved forwards. Narcissa, itching for some revenge and action, took the first action. She held no kindness for these Death Eaters, and she jabbed her wand forwards. Her spell was epitome of dark spells. It was as if darkness took over her wand. 3 shadow-like tentacles emerged from her wand. The tentacles were almost 6 feet in length and had a conical front, like the head of a snake. Narcissa smirked, sending a chill down the spine of the Death Eaters she was facing. She slashed her wand forward, and under the astonished eyes of the Death Eaters, the 3 tentacles moved in a flash. 2 Death Eaters were able to react in time and blasted the tentacles midway. The other Death Eater was late, and the tentacle struck his arm. From the spot the tentacle made its impact, the flesh of the man started to be devoured. It was as if the tentacle was gnawing the flesh of the man and rotting it. The Death Eater screamed in pain. The other Death Eaters who witnessed this swallowed hard. One of them fired a cutting curse, splitting the tentacle in 2. The tentacle, now in 2 pieces, fell on the ground, but it was not alone. Along with it fell half the hand of the Death Eater, bitten unevenly from his elbow. The Battle of Hogsmeade had begun. Chapter 126, Battle of Hogsmeade, 2. November 1994. Hogsmeade Village. While Narcissa Black simultaneously took on the three Death Eaters, Minerva McGonagall, the Transfiguration headmistress, was in a league of her own. Although she had the same ever-present stern expression on her face, the rage bubbling in her eyes was clear to everyone. This was the first time Minerva was truly angry in a very long time. Even during the previous rise of Voldemort, he had not dared to attack Hogsmeade as it was an extension of Hogwarts. Although she was a member of the Order of the Phoenix during the last war, she had hardly fought against the Death Eaters. She would mostly remain in Hogwarts, and on rare occasions when she had confronted the Death Eaters, she had to hold herself back because of Dumbledore's preaching of kindness and forgiveness. But this time the world will know her wrath. The cape of her robes fluttered with the magic and she twirled around in rotation with her wand pointing outwards. Following her wand, 6 decently sized stones, from the destroyed establishments of the Hogsmeade, levitated in air and rotated around her. She stopped her twirl after rotating a full term. The 6 pieces of stones continued to float in air, in front of her. Minerva, without any break in her flow, jabbed her wands forward and the 6 pieces of stones struck to each other. This was followed by another jab from her wand and the combined stone pieces started to transfigure. The stone at the top transfigured to form a stone head with every facial feature like eyes, nose, and mouth engraved upon it. The stone below the head transfigured to form the torso of the stone sculpture, while the remaining 4 stones transfigured to form the 4 limbs, i.e., 2 hands and 2 legs of the sculpture. Minerva repeated her previous action and another stone sculpture of the same size stood next to the previous statue. As if life was imbued in the statue, the 2 statues started to run towards the 4 Death Eaters who stood facing Minerva. One of the Death Eaters sneered at this and raised his wand, Bombarda Maxima. The spell collided with one of the stone statues, but the expected result did not occur. There was no blast as expected, the spell merely produced a small ripple on the stone surface. The Death Eater gazed at the end of his wand in astonishment. For his little brain could not comprehend what has happened. His Bombarda Maxima should have blasted away a simple statue made of pure stone. Phileas Flitwick, who was engaged in duel with 2 wizards, let out a deep sigh. This is not a mere stone statue. It represents Minerva's magical strength. To destroy the statue, the spell would need to overpower Minerva's magical strength. He added further, and wizards or witches who could overcome her magical strength. Although Phileas did not complete his sentence, his meaning was clear. The 4 Death Eaters gritted their teeth hearing this and laid out a continuous stream of various spell on the statues. Even so, not a scratch remained on the statues. Meanwhile, the statues, considering their structure of stone and weight, were very quick on their feet. In no time, they had covered a lot of distance and were merely 10 feet away from the 4 Death Eaters. The statues at this point raised both their hands and took a stance as if they were about to punch the air. The people witnessing the battle watched this action in confusion, failing to understand what was about to happen. The 4 hands, in front of the shocked eyes of the witnesses and the Death Eaters, transfigured into a blade-like structure. The next moment, in extremely fast speed, the blades elongated and pierced the neck of the 4 Death Eaters. It all happened in a moment of flash and no Death Eater was able to react to the attack. The blades had pierced their throats and the blood was gurgling out from the wound. They did not die immediately and struggled hard but could not produce a single sound. They died in few seconds. The transfigured blades were pulled back and returned back to their original state of being a hand. The 4 bodies fell with a thud and Minerva stood tall behind the statues. An oppressive aura was bursting from her bodies, pressing down the Death Eaters. Her presence was sending chills down the spines of the slaves of the Voldemort. November 1994. Prison of Azkaban. Amelia Bones arrived at the isolated island. Following behind her were more than 2 dozen Aurors. What she witnessed upon her arrival left her in state of shock. The mighty and the strong walls of the Azkaban had been reduced to rubbles. Around a dozen of Aurors, who were stationed as guards, lay dead. Few of them were given swift death, most probably with the killing curse, with no signs of other injuries on their bodies. But few of the dead Aurors had their body badly mutilated. Some had their limbs missing while some had their interior split open with internal organs dropping outside. Signs of extreme torture in the form of numerous cuts and burns on the bodies were clearly visible. It was a horrendous sign to look, and barring the few aged and experienced Aurors who had witnessed the brutality of the war, the rest of the Aurors were nauseous. Few had not been able to hold back and had emptied all the content inside of their stomach. But Amelia's mind was not focused on these things. She was looking above where the Dementors should have been stationed to protect the prison. But to the rising fear of Amelia, more than half of the Dementors were missing. And she could only think of one person who had the ability to control the Dementors. "Contact the Department of Care of Magical Creatures," bellowed Amelia to no one in particular. Chapter 127, Overwhelming Victory. November 1994. Hogsmeade Village. With Narcissa taking on 3 Death Eaters, Minerva taking on 4 and Phileas battling 2 Death Eaters, Harry was left to deal with 9 Death Eaters. Battling them to a stalemate was something that was not very difficult for Harry, but killing them all would not be so easy. He had taken few steps forward and closed some of the distance between him and the Death Eaters. He was having a furious expression on his face and his green eyes were glowing even during the daylight. More than half of the Death Eaters facing him were already injured from Harry's fiend fire or from Hedwig's attack. Even though Harry was furious, he was in no hurry. He was moving slowly as if taking a stroll in the park. In the same lazy-like manner, he raised his hands and pointed his wand towards the Death Eaters. Following his action, it appeared as if the air in front of the wand was being compresses. Visible ripples started to appear in the air and slowly the air started to rotate. The colorless appearance of the air started to change and it took a shadowy black color. In moments, the speed of the rotation increased dramatically and it took the shape of a vortex. A fast-spinning vortex, black in color. Even though, from appearance it looked nothing dangerous, but a feeling of dread spread among the Death Eaters facing Harry. It was as if death itself was spreading with the vortex as the center. Their heart palpitated with fear and they could not get rid the image of Harry's spell cleaving their comrade into 2, from their heads. But that was not end of the Harry's first spell. Following the formation of the first black-colored vortex, 6 more vortexes, 3 on each side of Harry were formed in the air. Harry jabbed his wand and the vortexes launched themselves at the Death Eaters. All of these Harry's action happened in moments. 5 of the Death Eaters had fast reflexes and they fired their own spells to counter Harry's vortex. 5 of these spells collided with these vortexes. A stalemate for very small moment occurred and the spells of the Death Eaters dispersed immediately. The only effect of their spells was that they slowed the vortex a bit. This gave them more reaction time and all of 5 of them fired 2 more consecutive and more powerful spells to finally counter the vortex. Of the remaining 2 Death Eaters, one even though slow in his reflex was able to dodge the vortex. But it was not a complete dodge. In the last moment, his right arm was grazed by the vortex. The Death Eater felt unprecedented pain and he screamed at the top of his lungs. He did not lose his arm completely, but a major chunk of flesh was missing above the elbow. The last Death Eater was caught completely off guard. He had merely raised his wand, when Harry's vortex struck his chest and he screamed. It was not a painless death as Minerva had given to her opponents. The vortex did not pierce the chest but it drilled the flesh. Small chunks of bones, flesh and internal organs were splattered around as the vortex rotated and drilled inside. The Death Eater continuously thrashed as he screamed in pain until death took over him. The leader of the Death Eaters, who had just dispersed Harry's vortex, looked around and clenched his fist in frustration. His eyes caught the scene of Minerva's statue killing 4 of his Death Eaters in one go, Narcissa's dangerous spell and Phileas easily fighting 2 of his comrades to a stalemate and finally Harry killing another of his comrade. Out of 21 Death Eaters who had arrived to attack Hogsmeade, 10 were already dead. Of the remaining 11, more than half were badly injured with 2 of them having lost their hands. He knew that if the battle continued for another few seconds, his entire group would be slaughtered. What should have been a simple mission of attack and ambush was proving to be a death walk for them. "Everyone," he shouted and the remaining Death Eaters turned their attention towards him. Minerva's shrill voice immediately followed, "Harry. They are going to retreat but not before firing a barrage of killing curses," she shouted. This was the strategy they used in the last war. Harry having Voldemort's memories, how could he not be aware of all this? Before the Death Eaters could rally themselves, he whipped his wand and jabbed in quick motions. 3 spells left his wand and struck the ground. The 3 overpowered Bombarda Maxima struck the ground and it was as if a small earthquake had occurred. The ground was blown up and 3 small craters were formed on the ground. Dust, pebbles and blocks of stones were launched in the air, obscuring the vision of both sides. Harry did not stop here and slashed his wand continuously, sending green slashes of the cutting curses. One of his slash found its mark and struck a Death Eater, killing him immediately, even before he could scream. The other 3 professor were also not behind and fired consecutive spells towards the Death Eaters. On the other hand, the Death Eaters, losing their focus because of the call of their leader, were caught completely off guard at the extra quick reaction from Harry and the professors. 2 more curses from the professors struck their mark and 2 more bodies fell. The leader, unable to complete even his last attack, gritted his teeth. "Now!" With his words, the Death Eaters took a sigh of relief and with the twist of space vanished from Hogsmeade. Of the 21 Death Eaters that had come to attack Hogsmeade, 13 had been killed and Harry had secured an overwhelming victory in the Battle of Hogsmeade. As soon as the Death Eaters vanished, Harry's head snapped towards Phileas Flitwick. Where is Alastor Moody? Chapter 128, Aftermath. November 1994. Hogsmeade Village. Harry's sudden and abrupt reaction about Alastor Moody left Flitwick in a mild state of shock. Still not over his adrenaline rush and fatigue of the battle, he stammered an incoherent reply. After you along with Minerva left the Hogwarts in morning, he paid me a visit. He talked about some kind of urgent work in the Muggle world. And with how paranoid he is, you know, he mostly talked in puzzles and did not come clean with his purpose. At the end, he stated that he would be away from Hogwarts for few hours and would return by afternoon at most. Flitwick took a deep breath and continued, now, even if I am informally in charge of Hogwarts in Minerva's absence, I have no real authority, more so on people like Professor Moody, who have a bit of special status. Considering that I did not think much about his absence as it was a Hogsmeade day and the classes were off, I did not think it was something strange for him to absent for few hours. Harry stared impassively at Phileas for few moments, but ultimately gave a nonchalant hum in response. At this moment, Septima Vector and Baths Haida Babbling arrived and were pleasantly surprised to find so many dead bodies of the Death Eaters. Headmistress McGonagall, said Septima Vector. We have moved all the students to Hogwarts Castle. Professor Sprout and Madame Pomfrey had volunteered to accompany them. They would be keeping all the students in the Great Hall and wait for further instructions. Professor Babbling took over. We have been fortunate as no student have been reported dead. Minerva, Phileas, and Narcissa took a breath of relief at this while Harry also felt some tension leaving his body. Babbling continued, 8 students have been injured though while one among them is heavily injured as a roof had fell upon him. He would take few weeks to completely recover. She sighed deeply in sorrow, but unfortunately, 3 normal civilians have been killed as many more injured. We fear that we may have more casualties as more of the rebels are removed, she added with a ting of sorrow. Minerva's expression turned downcast at this while Harry clenched his fist in anger. Every time the innocents had to pay the price of Voldemort's misadventures. If we could have made a bit earlier, maybe we could have saved those lives, said Phileas from the side, and Harry's mind would not help but wander towards the absence of Alastor Moody. Madam McGonagall, said Harry. Contact the DMLE and the Aurors and report them of the situations. Although, I doubt they would be responding for few hours, but we should do our part, he muttered. Narcissa and the other professors who were at Hogwarts gazed at him questioningly. Harry cleared their doubts, Azkaban has also been attacked. Their eyes widened in shock, while Baths Haida muttered, they are Death Eaters, is it? She wanted to voice what everyone had in their mind but did not because of the fear of that slightest of its possibility of being true. No one dared to imagine about Voldemort coming back to life. Harry shook his head, we are not one who ought to think about all this. He cut across whatever Septima was about to speak, Madam McGonagall, please look after and organize the rescue efforts. If be possible, Madame Pomfrey can take a look at the injured civilians. Also, few words from you to calm the students would be a good option, finished Harry. He continued and said with a finality in his tone, in no case, any outsider would be admitted inside Hogwarts without my explicit permission. Minerva nodded in agreement and then along with the other professors walked away while Narcissa remained behind. After the professor were out of the hearing range, Narcissa gazed inquisitively at Harry, so, he is finally back. Harry did not answer. He himself was left wondering. He was not sure if Voldemort had been able to get himself a body, and if yes then how? Was this attack his declaration of war? Or simply a diversion for some another purpose? Seeing Harry not speaking, Narcissa shook her head, Lord Potter, alone you are too powerful, very powerful. But you would need to allies. You cannot possibly fight an army of Death Eaters on your own. And if you could and possibly even kill the Dark Lord, by the time you accomplish all this, the Dark Lord would turn half the Wizarding Britain in ruins. With her last piece of advice, Narcissa walked away leaving Harry alone. Meanwhile, Harry lost in his thoughts vanished from the Hogsmeade village. November 1994. Chamber of Secrets, Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Inside the Chamber of Secrets, all of 5 of the Harry's house elves were huddled together in a circle with a grave expression on their face. They were certainly aware of the attack on Hogsmeade and subsequent arrival of Harry and his participation in the war. Only the magic connection, they had with Harry which told them that Harry was alive was keeping them calm, but even so their worry did not ease a bit. Their despairing face lit up with a joy, when the space inside the chamber twisted and Harry appeared. Seeing him free from any kind of injury, their worried heart eased and their emotions calmed down. Dobby the over-enthusiastic elf was the first to jump in joy. "Harry Potter sir, you are fine." A smile bloomed on Harry's face seeing all his 5 elves. "Yes, Dobby. I am absolutely fine," said Harry. "Now, I want to rest a bit and spend some time alone," said Harry before the elves could say anything more. "Also, could you be on a lookout if some kind of urgent situation arises? No one will be able to find me out here," added Harry further. The elves, satisfied that their Harry Potter sir was fine, nodded with joy and then popped away from the chamber. If you are enjoying my story, support me at PayPal. https://www.paypal.me/novelcorner. Got my Patreon. Support me if you like my story. 5 advanced chapters and my other fanfiction available. patreon.com/novelcorner. Replace at with a. Thank you for reading. Rate, review, and comment on my novel. Also send the power stones. Comment. 8 comment. Vote. Chapter 129, Alastair Moody. November 1994. Chamber of Secrets, Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. After the 5 elves vanished, Harry slumped on a wooden chair. When his mind should have been wondering about the attack, or about Voldemort or what the Dark Lord's next course would be, he was not able to get Alastair Moody out of his mind. His mind was not accepting Alastair's absence and the attack on the same time as a mere coincidence. After Minerva, the legendary Mad-Eye Moody was definitely the best wizard Hogwarts currently. If he had been present, then the losses that Hogsmeade had suffered could have been minimized even further. The fact that for past 3 consecutive years, Harry had had a complex kind of situation with defense against dark arts professors, with the professors in the first 2 years outright trying to kill him, was constantly floating in his mind. His instinct was screaming all these facts to him. He felt restless about the whole situation. From the time Narcissa had mentioned about someone in close proximity to him carrying information to Voldemort, he had seen every person around him with a glance of suspicion. He himself believed someone other than Snape in Hogwarts was involved with Voldemort, and that person was responsible for his name coming out of the goblet. Harry closed his eyes and his mind started to wander the memories from the very first time he had encountered Moody. His dramatic entry in Hogwarts's Great Hall on the first day of this Hogwarts year, his act of turning Draco into a ferret, him trying to teach the unforgivables and Moody looking at him with wicked eyes when Harry had mocked Igor Karkaroff. Harry was replaying all the memories in his mind repeatedly, when his eyes snapped open in alarm. Moody taking sip from his small tin can at regular intervals. Be at breakfast or dinner in the Great Hall or during classes or even while walking during the corridors, everywhere. While Moody was a known paranoid and an alcoholic, he definitely must not be that gone to be drinking everywhere. With his motto of constant vigilance, how was it possible for him to be drunk every time? Harry's mind snapped to his own memory when he along with Ron had used the polyjuice potion to disguise themselves as Draco's lackeys, Crabbe and Goyle, to find out the truth about the heir of Slytherin business in the second year. His mind went into a frenzy of calculation about the possibilities of his doubt being true. And if Alastair Moody wandering in Hogwarts all this while was a fake one as Harry doubted, then the real Moody should be somewhere close. The real Alastair Moody was very much needed for his hair, so that a continuous supply of the polyjuice potion could be brewed. Although it was entirely possible that the real Moody might also be hidden somewhere else, but that would be a difficult task to manage. He whipped his hand, a parchment came flying to him. The Marauder's map. "I solemnly swear, I am up to no good," muttered Harry with a tap on the map, and it came alive. In an instant his eyes wandered towards the Moody's office and his widened in surprise on finding the name Alastair Moody being displayed on the map. He gazed at the map for few seconds and observed that Moody was completely still. Harry did not hesitate further and vanished from the Chamber of Secrets, and in next moment he appeared inside Alastair's office. Gazing the map, he pinpointed at a magical trunk on one side of the room in which Moody must have been stored. Harry closed the distance with the trunk and found it to be locked, which was not an obstruction for someone of his caliber of wizard. The lock was breached in moments and Harry discovered an unconscious Moody lying in the trunk. Seeing the real Moody, a grin appeared on Harry's face. "It seems, I will one-up you this time, Voldemort," chuckled Harry. "Now, who are you?" muttered Harry, thinking about the impostor. Even so, he did not rescue the real Moody and simply locked the trunk. His primary purpose was to first find out what was the impostor's aim and by extension Voldemort's aim. He was sure by now that it was the impostor who had put his name in the goblet. But what purpose did Voldemort wanted to achieve through this method? Only after finding out the real plan, Harry decided that he would make his next move. Till then Moody would remain where he was. Now, he had to wait for the impostor to arrive. November 1994. Ministry of Magic. While Harry was waiting for the impostor Alastor Moody in Hogwarts, Amelia Bones had just returned to the Ministry after dealing with the immediate issues at the Azkaban. Her face was stiff and her mind full of thoughts about the implication of what had happened. She shuddered to even think in one particular direction and forced her mind to shut its thoughts about the possibilities of his return. But even if she remained all positive, the mere criminals that fled Azkaban would unleash a terror on the wizarding world. Blood would flow as smooth as water. She was on her way to her office when a particular variety of toad interrupted her way. It was a humanoid toad. "Madam Bones," said Dolores with a smile and almost a glee. "Minister wants to see you in his office immediately." The previous lost color of Dolores' face after Harry had declared the blood feud with her was now gone. Instead, she appeared rosy than ever and was almost gazing directly into Amelia's eyes as if provoking the DMLE chief. Already in bad mood, Amelia stared placidly at Dolores and Toad subconsciously took a step back. Satisfied, Amelia said, "I will be coming in few minutes." With this Amelia tried to walk towards her office, when Dolores stood in her way. Amelia felt her anger rising and she raised an eyebrow. Dolores, back to her confident self, smiled in glee, "Madam Bones, the minister wants to see you, immediately." "It is an order," she added with a smirk. Chapter 130, Barty Crouch. November 1994. Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Harry was lying comfortably on his bed with his eyes closed when his eyes snapped open. He felt the wards of Hogwarts stirring, notifying him of the arrival of the Alastor Moody. Even so, he did not immediately go to apprehend the impostor and took out the Marauder's map. His eyes moved towards the main Hogwarts entrance. A man was shown walking inside the Hogwarts corridor from the main gate and Harry's eyes widened in shock reading the name. "Barty Crouch," muttered Harry. "The dead Barty Crouch." Seeing this, Harry felt his anger rising. The only way Barty Crouch Jr. could be walking inside Hogwarts, when everyone knew him to be dead, was only possible if Barty Crouch Sr. had devised the plans. On one hand, the ex-DMLE head threw Sirius into Azkaban into prison without any trial, and on the other hand deceived the whole world into believing that his son was dead. Harry calmed his mind and vanished from the spot. Barty Crouch, disguised as Alastor Moody, had just returned to Hogwarts and was walking through the school corridor towards his office when he felt a presence in front of him. "Who is it?" he questioned as he also took out the wand and pointed it forward. Harry stepped forward from the turn with a smile on his face. "Professor." Barty frowned. "Harry Potter?" Harry nodded. "Yes, Professor." "May I ask where were you when Hogwarts was being attacked?" asked Harry. Barty grunted in the usual moody style. "Did not Professor Flitwick told you?" "I had some urgent work in the Muggle world," he said in irritation. "Oh," said Harry. "What work?" Barty was irritated and was about to almost lash at Harry for being too intruding when Harry completed, "Barty Crouch." It took a moment for him to understand its implication, and out of instinct he raised his wand to fire a spell when another spell him before he could react. Darkness took over him and he fell with a thud. November 1994. Ministry of Magic. Meanwhile, some time back before Harry took down Barty Crouch, Dolores the Toad had just told Amelia about the minister's order of her summon. Seeing the glee on Dolores' face and hearing the word order, Amelia's face hardened and her expression turned stiff. "Dolores," said Amelia, her eyes icy. "Just because I tolerate you as you are an undersecretary to the minister does not mean that I will take all your nonsense." Amelia's voice cut across like a knife and Dolores gulped in fear. "DMLE head or not, I am on a hierarchy that your life is nothing in front of me." Hearing the same word, Dolores could not help but remember the moment when Andromeda had told Harry that he could kill her without any repercussion. "Next time," continued Amelia, "if you cross your line, I will set out an example of you." With this Amelia walked away, leaving Dolores seething in rage. Madam Bones had not walked more than few steps when her voice echoed again, "And Dolores, if I were you, I would be thinking about the blood feud Lord Potter have declared on you. This time you are still alive because he saw you in the Wizengamot." November 1994. Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. When Barty Crouch opened his eyes, he found himself in a dark place. The lights very dim and he could barely see his own hands and legs. He found himself sitting on a large stone chair. His hands and legs were magically strapped to the armrest and legs of the chair respectively. He looked around when a voice came, "Barty, you are awake." Barty looked forward to find stepping out from the darkness. This dark place was none other than Chamber of Secrets. He had created this dark effect to simply create an illusion of intimidation. "You!" gritted Barty Crouch. Harry chuckled and ignored whatever the Death Eater wanted to say, "Although I know that you will not open your mouth, but still torturing a Death Eater would be fun, before I use other methods." Barty, still not understanding the gravity, scoffed at this. Harry smiled and pointed his index finger towards his leg, and a red spell left his finger. The bone-breaking curse struck Barty's legs and he let out a small yelp of pain. Even so, he had his eyes widened in surprise. "You, wandless magic." As if thinking something, Harry muttered, "With how that filth of your Dark Lord." "Voldemort." Barty let out a wild growl at Voldemort's insult and struggled hard to break free from the bindings. Harry continued without a break, "This amount of pain is like candies for you all, Death Eater. Let us test your limits of pain," grinned Harry evilly, and Barty, for first time after being caught, felt a bad premonition in his heart. Harry pointed his finger and black thread-like structure emerged in front of his finger. It was something similar to Narcissus' tentacles but not the same thing. The thread, under Harry's control, closed the distance with Barty, who looked at it with wide eyes. The thread did not stop and arrived near Barty's right hand. Without any break, the thread pierced the palm of Barty's hand and he screamed in pain. It was not like a simple stab. He felt as if his muscles were being chewed wherever the thread touched. Even so, there was no visible change in his muscles. "Interesting," muttered Harry. "Not a very high pain tolerance." He wriggled his finger and the thread slithered and moved inside Barty's palm, traveling all the way to his wrist. The pain Barty was feeling increased many folds and he screamed even louder. "This is going to be fun," chuckled Harry. Harry again, his finger and the thread slithered more, traveling all the way up to Barty's elbow. "After all, I don't get an alive Death Eater daily," whispered Harry.
Thanks for listening.